the most well-known maritime disasters was the tragedy of the Titanic ship in 1912. More than 100 years later, the disaster, made even more popular by the blockbuster, you would claim, a new set of victims when the expedition of Titansubmersible exploded. In this video, we bring you the terrifying last hours of the Titan submarine. Titanic was a huge and luxurious ocean liner that collided with an iceberg on its maiden voyage from Southampton to New York in 1912. More than 1,500 people died in the sinking, exposing the flaws in the ship's design and the lack of safety regulations at the time. The Titanic was built by the Harland and Wolff Shipyard Yard in Belfast, Northern Ireland. As part of the White Star Line, it was the largest ship afloat at the time, measuring 882 feet long and 92 feet wide. It had 4 funnels and 3 propellers and could carry up to 2,435 passengers and 892 crew members. It was equipped with many luxurious features such as a grand staircase, a gymnasium, a swimming pool, a library, and several restaurants and cafes. It was erroneously considered to be unsinkable, as it had 16 watertight compartments that could be sealed in case of emergency. The Titanic would set sail from Southampton on April 10th, 1912, with 2,224 people on board, including some of the wealthiest and most famous people in the world, such as John Jacob Astor, Benjamin Guggenheim Isidore, and Ida Strauss and Margaret Molly Brown. The ill-fated ship also carried many immigrants who were seeking a new life in America. The captain was Edward J. Smith, a veteran sailor who was planning to retire after the voyage. The ship made 2 stops in Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, Ireland, before heading across the Atlantic Ocean. The Titanic's voyage was smooth and uneventful until the night of April 14th, when the ship received several warnings from other ships about icebergs in the area. However, the Titanic did not slow down or change course, as it was trying to make a record-breaking crossing at 11:40 p.m. The lookout spotted an iceberg directly ahead of the ship and alerted the bridge, the officer in charge. William Murdoch ordered the ship to turn hard to port and reverse the engines, but it was too late. The Titanic struck the iceberg on its starboard side, creating a series of holes along the hull. The impact also caused the ship's rivets to pop and the seams to buckle, allowing water to flood into the lower compartments. The Titanic's crew and passengers soon realized that the ship was in serious trouble. The captain ordered the lifeboats to be lowered and the distress signals to be sent. However, there were not enough lifeboats for everyone on board, as the ship only carried 20 lifeboats with a capacity of 1,178 people. The lifeboats were also launched half empty, as many people did not believe that the ship was sinking or refused to leave their belongings behind. The crew also faced difficulties in maintaining order and discipline, as some passengers panicked and tried to force their way into the lifeboats, while others were reluctant to leave their loved ones behind. The Titanic's wireless operators, Jack Phillips and Harold Bride, worked tirelessly to send SOS messages and coordinate with other ships, but the nearest ship, the Carpathia, was 4 hours away. The Titanic sank in less than 3 hours, breaking into 2 pieces at 2:20 a.m. on April 15th. The bow section plunged first, followed by the stern, which rose vertically before sinking. The ship's band played music until the very end, trying to calm the passengers and themselves. The water temperature was below freezing, and most of the people who jumped or fell into the water died of hypothermia within minutes. Only 710 people survived the disaster. Most of them women and children who were in the lifeboats. They were rescued by the Carpathia, which arrived at the scene at 4 a.m. The survivors were taken to New York, where they were met by a crowd of reporters, relatives, and curious spectators. The wreck of the Titanic was not discovered until 1985. when a joint French-American expedition led by Jean-Louis Michel and Robert Ballard found it at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. The Titanic continues to attract curious visitors. However, if you think visiting the Titanic wreck is an easy or cheap task, you are grossly mistaken. The wreck lies at a depth of about 12,500 feet or 3,800 m, and about 370 nautical miles or 690 kilometers south-southeast off the coast of Newfoundland. It lies in two main pieces, about 2,000 feet or 600 m apart. The bow is still recognizable, but the stern is completely ruined. A debris field around the wreck contains hundreds of thousands of items spilled from the ship. As she sank, the wreck is protected by a UNESCO convention and has been visited by many scientific and tourist expeditions. To reach the wreck, you would require a special submersible that can withstand the high pressure and low temperature of the deep sea. Only a few companies offer such tours, and do they charge a hefty price for the privilege? Such tours could last for 10 days, and each tourist might get to participate in a single 6 to 8 hour dive to the Titanic, which includes the 90-minute descent and 90-minute ascent. Interestingly, the tours can also double up as scientific research missions to examine the sea life surrounding the wreck and document its condition before it disintegrates entirely due to a deep sea bacteria that eats iron, which researchers are concerned might happen within the next few decades. Visiting the Titanic wreck is not only expensive and difficult, but also dangerous and controversial. The submersible could malfunction or implode under the immense pressure trapping or killing the passengers. The wreck itself could collapse or release toxic substances. The tours could also damage or disturb the wreck, which is considered a grave site and a cultural heritage. Some people argue that the wreck should be left alone and respected, while others claim that it should be explored and salvaged. The Titanic wreck is a landmark that almost no one can see, but many want to, despite the challenges and risks. Some people have managed to visit the Titanic wreck and fulfill their lifelong dreams. Among them are some famous and wealthy individuals. The latest visitors to the Titanic, however, would pay the ultimate price, and this is where oceangate really comes in. oceangate is a company that offers a unique and thrilling opportunity to explore the deep sea and witness the most famous shipwreck in history. oceangate developed a special submersible called Titan, which can take up to 5 people to a depth of 3,800 m or 12,467 feet. The submersible is made of lightweight materials such as carbon fiber and titanium and has a cylindrical shape that allows more space for the passengers. The submersible was equipped with high-resolution cameras, sonar and lights, which enabled the passengers to see and document the Titanic and its surroundings. oceangate offered a series of expeditions to the Titanic, which lasted for 10 days, 8 of which were at sea. The mission specialists also received training and orientation before the dive and enjoy luxury hospitality aboard the expedition vessel. The Titan submersible had many features that made it unique and advanced. It was the first privately owned submersible with a claimed maximum depth of 4,000 m or 13,000 feet, and the first completed crewed submersible with a hull constructed of titanium and carbon fiber composite materials. It was also the only 5-person sub that could reach Titanic depths, according to CBS reporter David Pogue, who boarded the sub in 2022.
The submersible was 22 feet long and 8.3 feet high. It weighed 23,000 pounds. It could carry up to 1,510 pounds of payload and travel at a speed of 3 knots or 3.5 miles per hour using electric thrusters. It was equipped with powerful LED lights, a sonar navigation system, and high-end camera equipment. It had a single porthole and a life support system that could keep the crew alive for up to 96 hours. The titansubmersible worked by diving into the ocean and descending to the desired depth. It had a cylindrical shape that allowed more space for the passengers. The submersible was made of 2 titanium domes, joined together by a 5-inch thick cylinder of carbon fiber. The carbon fiber was a lightweight and cheap material that was very tough and strong. The submersible had a pressure hull that could withstand the immense pressure of the deep sea. The submersible also had a buoyancy system that could adjust the amount of water in the ballast tanks to control the ascent and descent. The submersible was controlled by a pilot who used a joystick and a game controller to maneuver the vessel.
Controller and these touch screens. So if you want to go forward, you press forward. If you want to go back, you go back, turn left, turn right, go down, go up. And it's Bluetooth, so I can hand it.
The submersible also had a communication system that could send and receive signals from the surface. The Titan submersible offered a series of expeditions to the Titanic, which lasted for 10 days, 8 of which were at sea. Each expedition had space for 9 paying tourists, who were called mission specialists. The mission specialists paid $250,000 each for the chance to see the Titanic up close and to participate in scientific research. OceanGate's Titan submersible also had some flaws that could have compromised its safety and performance.
Well, the director of the 1997 film Titanic, James Cameron, who is also an expert on submersibles, says there may need to be further regulation of the industry. He's been speaking to our science editor, Rebecca Morell.
You've been down to the Titanic wreck site many times. I mean, you've been even deeper. You did the first solo dive to the bottom of the Mariana Trench.
And you came out and saw my sub before I made that dive, and I took you through the whole process. You even sat inside it, so you kind of know what it feels like to be inside it. And that sub went to 3 times. So when people go down to a place like Titanic as let's call it a citizen explorer, right? I don't like tourists. I think somebody that's willing to spend that kind of money and do that kind of preparation and devote weeks of their life, they're a citizen explorer. If they shouldn't have to worry about the vehicle that they're in.
The use of carbon fiber for the hull was an unconventional and risky choice, as the material had no strength in compression and could develop invisible cracks under repeated pressure changes. OceanGate had been warned about the potential dangers of using carbon fiber by experts and former employees, but the company dismissed the concerns as baseless and insulting. The company also refused to subject the submersible to proper certification or testing by independent agencies, claiming that it was following its own rigorous standards and procedures. The company also faced legal disputes and accusations of cutting corners and misleading customers.
Worry about Titanic, because it's a dangerous site, for entanglement and collapse. You could have a structural collapse on the sub. It's a very dangerous site, but understand the risks, agree to those risks, but don't be in a situation where you haven't been told about the risks of the actual platform that you're diving in. In the 21st century, there shouldn't be any risks.
The passengers on the ill-fated trip of the Titan submersible included the founder and CEO of OceanGate himself, the 61-year-old Stockton Rush. Rush was also the pilot of the vessel and had a passion for ocean exploration. He had a degree in aerospace engineering from Princeton University and a master's degree in business administration from the University of California. He had previously worked as a pilot for United Airlines. He said that he started OceanGate because he wanted to make the deep sea accessible to more people and to discover new life forms and artifacts. On board was also Hamish Harding, a 58-year-old British businessman and adventurer who was the chairman of Action Aviation, a company that specialized in aircraft sales and charter. He was also a record-breaking aviator who had flown around the world over both poles in 2008 and had completed several other feats of endurance and speed. He was married to Linda and had 2 sons, Rory and Giles, and 2 stepchildren, Lauren and Brian. He said that visiting the Titanic was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Also on the passenger manifest were Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman Dawood, scions of a Pakistani business dynasty and British citizens. Shahzada, 48, was the director of Dawood Hercules Corporation, a conglomerate that had interests in fertilizer, energy, food, and technology. He was also a philanthropist who supported education, health, and social causes. Suleiman, 19, was his eldest son and a student at the University of Oxford. He had a keen interest in history and archaeology. They said that visiting the Titanic was a humbling and awe-inspiring experience, and that they were grateful to be able to witness this marvel of engineering and human endeavor. They were a father and son who shared a bond of curiosity and adventure. Also on the trip was Paul-Henri Narjolet, a 67-year-old French mariner and Titanic expert who was nicknamed Mr. Titanic, for good reasons. He was the director of underwater research for RMS Titanic Inc., the company that owned the salvage rights to the wreck. He had visited the Titanic more than 30 times since 1987 and had recovered thousands of artifacts from the ship. He was also a former naval officer and a diver who had participated in several other underwater expeditions and projects. He was a legend and a mentor who had a wealth of knowledge and experience. The explosion of the Titansubmersible, a tragic and shocking event that ended the lives of 5 adventurous and passionate explorers, occurred on June 18, 2023. On June 16, 2023, the Titansubmersible departed from St. John's, Newfoundland, aboard the expedition vessel Polar Prince, along with the 9 paying tourists, aka mission specialists. On June 17, 2023, the Polar Prince arrived at the dive site, near the bow of the Titanic. The Titansubmersible was deployed and began its descent to the wreck, with only 5 people on board. The dive was supposed to last for 6 to 8 hours, including the 90-minute descent and ascent. At 10:45 a.m. local time, the Titansubmersible reached a depth of 3,500 meters, or 11,483 feet, about 300 meters or 984 feet above the Titanic. The submersible was in contact with the Polar Prince, and the passengers were excited and eager to see the Titanic. At 11 a.m. local time, the communication between the Titansubmersible and the Polar Prince was lost. The Polar Prince tried to re-establish contact with the submersible, but received no response. The Polar Prince also tried to locate the submersible using sonar, but could not find it. The Polar Prince assumed that the submersible had a technical problem and was waiting for the problem to be resolved. The Polar Prince did not alert the authorities or initiate a search and rescue operation, as it hoped that the submersible would resurface at the scheduled time later that day. At 11:01 a.m. local time, the United States Navy detected an acoustic signature consistent with an implosion or explosion, about 500 meters or 1,640 feet from the bow of the Titanic. The United States Navy analyzed its acoustic data and concluded that the sound was likely the Titansubmersible's fatal implosion.
I think it's fine to be an innovator. You know, the sub that you sat in, that we built and that I operated to the deepest place on the planet, was an experimental craft. I own it. It was not certified. It was an experimental craft. Just like, you know, the Mercury and Gemini and Apollo rockets were experimental craft. They weren't certified, but they weren't taking passengers either. You know, I think the second that you create a business model around asking people for $250,000 to take them to some place, you have to ensure their safety. You have to jump through every possible hoop, and you have to listen to the consensus in the engineering community. I would submit that there's a terrible irony here. Here we have at the wreck of Titanic, we now have another wreck that is based on, unfortunately, the same principles of not heeding warnings. oceangate were warned. They had people working internally, apparently, that basically quit. They had some of us, I wasn't involved directly, but there were some of us in the deep submergence community that got together and wrote a letter to them saying, we believe that you are going on a path to catastrophe. That's a rough quote, something like that. And we all have, a concern here because it will be a setback for the deep submergence community because of this, because of the poor, let's call it poor choices. I don't want to say reckless, but let's say poor choices that were made.
The USN did not share this information with the public or the authorities, as it considered it classified and sensitive. The United States Navy only revealed this information 4 days later, after the submersible had been missing for 4 days and a search and rescue operation had been launched. At 11:01 a.m. local time, the Titan submersible imploded due to the immense water pressure, which was more than 300 times the atmosphere at the sea surface. The submersible's hull collapsed inward at a speed of about 2,200 feet or 671 meters per second, taking less than a millisecond to complete. The air inside the submersible auto-ignited and an explosion followed the initial rapid implosion. The human bodies incinerated and turned to ash and dust instantly. The submersible's debris scattered around the wreck site, some of it landing near the bow of the Titanic. The implosion and explosion killed all 5 passengers on board, without giving them any chance to react or escape. At 5 p.m. local time, the Titan submersible failed to resurface at the scheduled time. The Polar Prince became worried and alerted the authorities and the media about the missing submersible. The Polar Prince also requested assistance from other vessels and aircraft in the area. The United States Coast Guard, or USCG, the Canadian Coast Guard, and the Royal Canadian Navy responded to the distress call and initiated a search and rescue operation. The USCG also contacted the United States Navy and asked for its help in locating the submersible. The United States Navy agreed to provide its acoustic data and to send a ship and a remotely operated underwater vehicle, or ROV, to the dive site. On June 19, 2023, the search and rescue operation continued, with the participation of several commercial and research vessels and ROVs, as well as aircraft from the Royal Canadian Air Force and the United States Air National Guard. The search area was informed by the United States Navy's acoustic data, which suggested that the submersible had imploded while descending. The search teams used sonar, radar, and visual methods to try to find the submersible or its debris. However, the search was hampered by the depth, the darkness, the currents, and the weather conditions. The search teams also faced difficulties in coordinating and communicating with each other as they had different protocols and equipment. On June 20th, 2023, the search and rescue operation intensified as the chances of finding any survivors decreased. The search teams focused on the area around the bow of the Titanic, where the submersible was last seen, and where the USN detected the implosion sound. The search teams also expanded the search area, as the submersible or its debris could have drifted away from the wreck site. The search teams also tried to contact the submersible using acoustic signals, hoping that the submersible had a backup communication system or a locator beacon. However, the search teams received no response from the submersible. On June 21st, 2023, the search and rescue operation reached a critical point, as the submersible's life support system was designed to last for up to 96 hours. The search teams knew that if the submersible was still intact and the passengers were still alive, they would run out of oxygen soon. The search teams also knew that the submersible had a self-destruct mechanism, which could be activated by the passengers or by the submersible itself in case of an emergency. The search teams hoped that the submersible had not imploded or exploded, and that the passengers had not activated the self-destruct mechanism. The search teams also hoped that the submersible had a distress signal or a flotation device, which could help them locate it. On June 22, 2023, the search and rescue operation finally found a debris field containing parts of the titansubmersible, about 500 meters or 1,640 feet from the bow of the Titanic. The debris field was discovered by a ROV operated by the USN ship. The debris field included the submersible's landing frame and a rear cover, which had the oceangate logo on it. The debris field also contained some human remains, which were presumed to belong to the passengers. The search teams confirmed that the submersible had imploded and exploded and that there were no survivors. The search teams also confirmed that the submersible had not activated its self-destruct mechanism or its distress signal. The search teams collected some of the debris and the human remains and brought them to the surface. The search and rescue operation was declared over, and the investigation into the cause of the explosion began. The aftermath of the titansubmersible explosion was a devastating and complex situation that involved many parties and processes. OceanGate suspended all its activities and operations, according to a one-line note posted on its website on July 6, 2023. The company had also advertised tours of the Portuguese archipelago of the Azores and the Bahamas, but these were also canceled. The company did not provide any further explanation or comment on the explosion or its consequences. The USCG initiated a formal investigation into the cause of the explosion, with the participation of the Canadian, UK, and French authorities, as well as the National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, and the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, or TSB. The investigation was led by Chief Investigator Captain Jason Neubauer, who said that the investigation would aim to prevent similar accidents in the future and to improve the safety of submersibles. The investigation was able to recommend civil or criminal charges if warranted. The investigation was expected to take several months or even years to complete, as it involved analyzing the debris, the acoustic data, the communication records, the submersible's design and construction, the company's policies and procedures, and the human factors. The investigation also faced several challenges and obstacles, such as the depth, the darkness, the currents, the weather conditions, the legal disputes, and the lack of regulations and standards for submersibles. The investigation also received criticism and pressure from the public, the media, the families of the victims, and the stakeholders of the Titanic wreck. It was one of the most complex and controversial investigations in maritime history. The families of the victims also filed lawsuits against OceanGate and RMS Titanic. The lawsuits alleged that OceanGate and RMS Titanic were negligent and reckless in their operation and management of the submersible and the expedition, and that they failed to ensure the safety and well-being of the passengers. The lawsuits also claimed that OceanGate and RMS Titanic Inc. were liable for the wrongful death and the emotional distress of the victims and their families. The families also sought compensatory and punitive damages, as well as an injunction to prevent OceanGate and RMS Titanic from conducting any further expeditions to the Titanic wreck. The lawsuits were expected to be lengthy and costly, as they involved complex legal and technical issues, as well as multiple jurisdictions and parties.